So part three of this week's topic on work, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about this thing called the post-Fordist work ethic. And again, we're joined by Dave Farrugia. Thanks, Dave. So you've written a book about the post-Fordist work ethic. We touched upon how these we can see these kind of epochal generational changes in the past in the previous part, but can you go into a bit more detail here about some of the ingredients that make this thing up?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll just kind of go through the points you've got here, which kind of sketches it out pretty well. So basically, I was interested in this book in two things. The first was, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of work ethic and young people's relationship with work, by which I mean what does work mean for them in their life. And the other thing I was interested in was social class. So in order to think about this, I came at it from kind of two angles. The first is that there's an amazing contemporary sociological tradition which looks at the relationship between class and identity or subjectivity. And it looks at it mainly, though, these days in terms of cultural politics, by which I mean the way that class distinctions are represented in culture, in forms of consumption, in
Yeah.
stereotypes that are made about different people, things like that. And this is what
That's what we've looked at earlier in the course, my stuff on hipsters and bogans, but the stuff about I've done around kind of class and punk, it kind of relates to that kind of more youth cultural media side of things.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's a really rich tradition of work now, and has really it's really where it's at in terms of class analysis in many respects. Um, and one of the things that that tradition of work has done is it's made us think about identity in terms of value. Now, not necessarily economic value, in fact, largely as moral value. So, what people like Bev Skeggs and whatnot have talked about is the way that class identities are seen as, in some way, some people are just simply seen as more valuable and just kind of like better than others, right? And there's a whole universe of meanings that comes to be connected with that. But the notion of value as a way of thinking about identity is actually a really specific and quite kind of contemporary way of thinking about the self, right? So what Skeggs says, she's not talking about work here, but it's still useful for us. She says value, contestations of value is like an ethical scenario for the formation of the self. So what she means by this, it's a little bit of a metaphor, but what she means by this is that distributions of value, in this case, kind of cultural value, are seen as are become ways of making moral judgments about people. Okay. So this is, I think, really valuable for us thinking about work. But what's happened in the process is that, sociology has started to really focus on popular culture, cultural politics, and there's been a shift away from work. Now, I'm not saying that popular culture and cultural politics aren't important, but work is obviously a really critical thing for class, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one thing I'm inspired by. The other thing that I'm inspired, the other thing I want to make a contribution to is that young people in social policy and in much research, the relationship between youth and work is basically focused on the getting of a job, right? So what matters is young people get a job, right? And so what researchers are interested in looking at is people's pathways, often from education through employment and in their sort of general careers. And so what matters there is when they get jobs, what kind of job they get, how much they get paid, what their working conditions are like. Now, this is obviously key, right? But what I'm interested in is how young people become workers. In other words, how does a person come to recognize themselves as someone who can produce value? And so, what this is kind of doing is taking the focus on class and subjectivity and the focus of identity there and trying to think about it in terms of economic value, in terms of that you need to think of yourself as a person who can produce economic value, right? What does that mean? And young people are confronting that question about themselves all the time. So my answer to this, to kind of elaborate on what I was saying earlier on, was to look at the post-Fordist work ethic and to try to think about the requirement to see work as a realm of self-realization, to think about that in terms of social class, and to ask a question, really, which is what we kind of do when we actually carry out data driven research, to ask the question, which is that, okay, we've got this general situation in which people are encouraged to see work as an area of self realization. What are people doing? in that context? How are people responding, and what can it tell us maybe about the experience of social class today?
Yeah, and so in terms of like thinking about this in terms of the traditions of youth transitions research, um, where again it's like this transitional period between a child and adult, you kind of do your study and you get your job and you get the partner and you get the house and you tick these things off. In terms of the school to work transition here, what you're kind of talking about here is that like that transitional period isn't as much about transition in that sense. It's about kind of making a self.
Yes,
Um,
that's right. That
and kind of and again, I've been going on in the course of how this kind of what we're looking at here kind of blurs those categories between youth, child, adulthood. Like, what even is adulthood if you're kind of struggling to get full-time work until you're 40 or whatever. So
mm,
you're looking here at kind of more in depth at the processes about how youth are kind of defining themselves within these social changes rather than the social changes themselves and the material outcomes.
yeah, that's right. So, I mean, youth transitions is concerned with origins and destinations. Okay,
Yeah.
where did you come from in terms of your family background, and then where do you end up in terms of employment? And what I'm interested in is what has to happen in terms on the level of identity for someone to actually get a destination. And I'm interested in that in terms of the requirements of the work ethic, really.
Yeah. So you're kind of in a way interested in more the process than the transition or the process and the trajectory itself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as it's manifested on young people's identities. That's right.
Yeah. So in the kind of empirical research you've done, you've kind of and relating to this kind of new work ethic, you've found in your work that there's kind of two different subjects here, like a subject of achievement and a subject of passion. And like to be clear, you're not kind of completely demarcating people into these boxes. It's a different way of thinking about things. Some of them do both, some of them do one more than other, some of them maybe do one. But can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, that's right. Sure, sure. So, basically, in the work that I did, I found that it was useful to think about two categories of people. Um, not as exhausting everything that's going on, but as something that teaches us about the work ethic and that teaches us a bit about the relationship between youth and work. So
Yeah,
I discovered yeah, kind of two categories of people. And so I'll sort of go through them. So the first were what I called subjects of achievement. Okay, so subjects of achievement understood work as an area of self-realization. They did. But there are questions around what self-realization actually means, right? I mean, it's an incredibly amorphous concept. So,
yeah,
we need to ask people, okay, what does this actually mean to you? Okay. So subjects of achievement experienced work in terms of self-realization, but that this would be manifested in a couple of ways. First, social mobility. So subjects of achievement tended to be what you might think of as upwardly mobile working class families. Their parents didn't tend to have higher education or even year 12 a lot of the time, but they had generally done good
yeah,
financially. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So they weren't they were from families that were modest but not educationally struggling. And what they wanted was to go up a little bit in society, usually not heaps.
yeah,
Okay, they didn't want to be corporate bankers or anything, but they wanted a comfortable life. They wanted achievements. Okay, so they wanted concrete goals to work towards,
yeah,
and they wanted to realize specific aspects of themselves that they could develop, usually through education one way or another, into a skill which would be recognized and rewarded on the labor market. So, a question that subjects of achievement might ask themselves is, what am I good at?
yeah,
Okay, I'm good at X. Okay, off I go to, wherever to cultivate that skill. Perhaps I get an entry level job, or perhaps I go to TAFE or something like that. And then I have a skill that I've cultivated from something I'm good at, and I can get that on the labor market. And then when I self realize, that will be manifested in things like promotions, pay rises, and things like that. So I'm realizing an aspect of myself, and that aspect is signified through some kind of material success. The other category of people that I looked at are what I call subjects of passion. So subjects of passion tended to be from more well-off backgrounds. Their parents had been to university. They were professionals, and subjects of passion, had tended to they all had university degrees or were studying at university, or if they were younger, they intended to go to university, right? Now, subjects of passion really emphasized this thing that I sort of introduced earlier on, the idea of work as a realm of passionate self-actualization. So what they said is what matters at work is that you're passionate and that you sort of develop your passions and you kind of express your passions at work. But the thing about subjects of passion is that they did not ask the question, what am I good at? Being good at stuff, kind of, that wasn't relevant to them, right?
Right.
What
Yeah.
matters is that they were passionate about it. And what they actually said was that being passionate, is something that you do across your whole life. It's not thinking about what am I good at and how can I mobilize that at work. It's simply, I am passionate, and as long as I follow my passions properly, I will be successful, and success will be signified by my passions, right?
Yep.
So, subjects of passion, in a sense, they had an easier time of it in the labor market than subjects of achievement, but their commitment to work in some ways was even more all-encompassing
Yep.
than others. So, yeah, this idea of passion, as opposed to achievement, I found was a really interesting way of looking at class. And I can talk a little bit more about that if you like
Yeah.
as we go along.
Yeah. I think we talked about that at the end. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
great.
let's
Okay.
let's look at some examples from the data. So this is a kind of example of subjective achievement. So what is this
Yeah.
correspond
Yeah,
to?
yeah, yeah. Great, great. So this is a young woman, and she was in the final part of a qualification in event management, and she articulates, I think, really well what's at stake for a subject of achievement. So the first thing to mention is that she said, I've got this thought in the back of my head that says I don't want to be nothing. I want to work and enjoy it and not just settle. So two things are going on here, right? First of all, the risk, if things don't work out for her, is that she's nothing. The
Yep.
stakes are high.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is what I mean about work as an arena of self-realization. To even have a self, you
Yep.
need to be kind of realizing that self as work.
Yep.
But the thing is as well that there's a kind of ambition here. She doesn't just want to settle. And she talked about she knew people around her. Well, she talks about it in this quote actually. So I'll sort of get to that. If you look at the last part of the quote, she says, "I don't want to be one of those people who's just left school, done whatever because they could get that, and then that's done." So she just doesn't want to just do the most obvious, easily available thing. She wants more than that. So she says to me, I'm a bit shy, but I'm very ambitious. And I ask her what that means. And she says, I always set goals for myself and I'm always striving for more. Things that are accomplishable as well. And I don't know, I just don't know how to explain it, but I think I'm ambitious because I can see where I need to go further. And if I'm not doing that, I can acknowledge it and set goals to go further. I want to look at other people and compare myself, and I want to feel like I've accomplished something. Right. So, and she had examples of this later on. Educational qualifications, getting particular jobs, getting promotions, things like this. So she knew, or she hoped that as long as she was constantly achieving things and setting further goals for herself, that she was not going to be nothing,
Yep.
right? That's what's at stake here.
Yep.
Okay. And so she's she sees work as a realm of self-actualization, but it's manifested in concrete things, in goals that she sets for herself.
Yep.
And this becomes really evocative when you compare it to the subjects of passion later on, who do see work in a very different way. Oh, here she is. Here we go. Okay, so she says, I always want to be able to say I've finished another qualification or I've just got a promotion. I want to be proud of myself for what I've done. See what I mean?
Yep.
So she these kind of manifestations of success, right?
Yep.
And later on, I asked her. She had just interviewed for a job doing event management for a bank. And I asked her, what would it mean to kind of do well? What would it mean to be successful for you? And she said, to do well is about trying hard, making a reputation for myself, things like that. And if this goes well, then I know that you feel like there's signs that you're on the right track, like everything seems to be flowing well. So if you succeed at work, then you're kind of going in the right direction in life in general.
Yep.
And it comes naturally, is what she says here. i.e., it kind of fits you in a way that feels effortless, in a way that's really you, you know?
Yep.
So there's a need there to have something more than just a paycheck, okay? But there's also a need, and there's also a need for material signifiers that you're succeeding. Yeah,
So it says there's external kind of signals as
that's
much as
right.
internally driven stuff. Yeah, yeah. So
That's right. That's right.
to subjects of passion.
Yeah.
Um,
So this is really in sharp contrast to the subjects of passion. One of the things we need to bear in mind for the subjects of passion, right, is that the material rewards of work for them are actually way higher than the subjects of achievement. Okay.
yeah,
So what's coming in the pay packet is a lot higher. But
yeah, yeah. So just I was saying in relation to the previous stuff in the course, we've looked at class differences in education and stuff like that, and so middle class to kind of working class ambitions and all this kind of stuff. And we can see this kind of playing out similar roles here in a way of middle class people talking about themselves in a kind of more open way than kind of more working class people that had kind of material concerns to actually address, whereas the middle
that's
class
right.
didn't have that as much. Yeah, sorry, go on. Yep.
That's right. There was another subject of achievement which did say, look, I have to say I do like money. Okay.
Yeah,
None of the subjects of passion said that.
yeah.
Okay. Because
People with
if you're
money
middle
don't
class,
talk about it.
talking about money,
Yeah,
if you're middle class, it's crass, it's
yeah,
gauche. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
So it's kind of one of those things. If you know what it costs, if you need to ask what it costs, then you don't have enough money to buy it, right? So here's a participant here who articulates what I called it an ethic. If we think about the work ethic, I called it an ethic of passion. Okay. And they say, I don't see work as a separate part of my life. I have one whole life and I want to be able to do things that I want to do. All that matters is that I'm passionate about it. If I'm not passionate, I can't be vibrant about things. She wanted to be vibrant. This person, incidentally, was an accountant, okay? A profession that is not popularly associated with vibrancy.
yeah,
Nevertheless, this is what she says about work. She says, if I'm not passionate about stuff, I feel dull, you know. So she says I can bring passion to almost anything, but I'm just a passionate person, but there are definitely things that excite me more than other things. So what she's basically saying here is she is intrinsically passionate. That is her state of being, right?
yeah,
In the most expansive sense when it comes to everything. Um, at work, what matters is that she can be passionate at work, okay? And if she is able to be passionate at work, then she is sort of vibrant. And it's
yeah,
it's feeling vibrant. That's the reward.
yeah,
That's the outcome of passionate engagement with work. In a sense, passion is the motivator, but it's also the reward, right? You know you're doing well when you're feeling passionate.
yeah,
Oh yeah, here's a young guy who he was passionate in all sorts of things, including his cricket club, things like that. Okay, so he said we were talking about passion. He had a lot to say about it, and he said, so I carry passion in my social scene, where he talked about often being the person to organize things for his friends and make connections between people and new friends and things like that. And he said, my underlying passion would be activating opportunities for others. Okay. I maintain that in a sporting sense with positions of leadership. I apply for grants for my cricket club, things like that. And then I bring that to my professional work, which is as a client relationship management person within a fairly substantial firm within Newcastle, but a global kind of concern. Activating opportunities for others to increase sales or improve customer service. So, you know, that's what he's basically saying is I am passionate limitlessly across my
yeah,
whole life. And at work, that is manifested in a particular way. And what's interesting about the subjects of passion is that the subjects of achievement talked a lot about the significance of education, right? The subjects of passion all had degrees and did not talk about the importance of their degrees at all when it
yeah,
came to making them a valuable worker. What they talked about was passion. And here's this young woman, this is the same young woman who talked earlier about being vibrant. What she said is that, to succeed at work, I need to be in a high performance mindset. And that means, being your best self. And, I said to her, how do you do that? And she said, well, yoga is one of the things. During an interview, she said to me, if you're ever tired before a meeting, do a handstand up against the wall because if you're upside down for a few minutes, it kind of amps you up a bit in one way or another. So she was really confident. I haven't tried it, but look, give it a go.
yeah,
So, but what she basically said is yoga helps her be mindful and more present. And so what mattered in her job as an accountant was not knowing, the kind of technical details of accountancy, but being centered and high energy. And you see what I mean? So
So it seems
in
like
in this,
part of this passionate thing is enrolling all your kind of cultural tastes and interests into this kind of sense of self. And it's just the investment and doing those things makes you a kind of better, more invested worker that kind of just it's is the payoff in and of itself.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So well, I say it here. So I've got this little table here, right? So subjects of achievement and subjects of passion can be usefully understood across three kind of domains: definitions of self-realization, definitions of value, and definitions of success, right? So for subject of achievement, self-realization is social mobility, right? For subjects of passion, self-realization is passion, right? It's passionate commitment. That's realization, self-realization. For subject of achievement, their value comes from their skills, their competence, their ability to do things. For subject of passion, for them, the value comes from passion,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, for subjects of achievement, what it means to succeed is to get somewhere material. For
Yeah.
subjects of passion, what it means to succeed is just a kind of constant personal development project that has no material signifiers, at least in terms of its narration. Although we can absolutely rest assured that if they didn't have a paycheck coming in, perhaps their priorities would shift a little. But
Yeah.
the definition of success is different here. It's about the self rather
Yeah.
than the material manifestation. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, to sum up, so what are the key implications of what you're saying here in terms of how we need to think about young people and work?
Yeah, well, so we need to think about work not just as something that young people go off and do, but as what I've called here a site of youth subjectification. And what I mean by that is work is a realm in which youth is made and in which young people are positioned as subjects, are positioned as having identities that make sense to themselves and that are recognizable to others. And this takes place in terms of a really increasingly intertwined relationship between identity and the capacity to create value at work, right? So what I'm basically saying is, I call it the disciplinary requirements of work. But what I mean by that is work is a realm in which you don't just do what you want. Okay, you have to
Yeah.
form yourself in relation to a set of requirements that are, to produce profit, right?
Yeah.
So work is a place where youth is made, and it's also a place where class is made through different definitions of the work ethic and through different definitions of what it means to create value.
Okay, Dave, thanks for that. That was great. I'll leave it there.
Okay, great.
Thanks.